Marcus Chen stared at the official document in his hands, reading the ornate text for the fifth time. The words hadn't changed. The Zephyrian royal seal still gleamed with that impossible blue-gold shimmer that proved its authenticity. The message remained the same. By royal decree, he was commanded to present himself at the Crystal Palace within 7 solar cycles to fulfill a marriage contract he'd never heard of. "This has to be a mistake," he muttered, running his fingers through his dark hair. The cramped quarters of his mining station felt even smaller now, the recycled air thick with the smell of metal dust and hydraulic fluid. Outside the porthole, the asteroid field of Sector 7 drifted in endless darkness, each rock a potential fortune if you knew where to dig. Marcus had been working the outer rim for 3 years, saving every credit to buy his own claim. He was nobody special, just another human trying to make it in a galaxy where his species was barely tolerated. Humans were new to the Galactic Alliance, recent members who still had to prove their worth. Most aliens saw them as crude, violent, and unpredictable. The communication panel chirped, and a holographic image materialized above his desk. Ambassador Elena Vasquez appeared, her diplomatic uniform crisp despite the light-year delay in transmission. Her expression was grim. "Marcus, I know this must be confusing. The Zephyrian High Council contacted us directly. Apparently, your genetic profile was selected through their ancient mate-bonding algorithms. It's unprecedented." Marcus laughed bitterly. "My genetic profile? I'm a miner from Luna Colony. My biggest achievement is finding a decent vein of titanium ore. What could they possibly want with me?" "The Zephyrians are dying out," Elena explained. "Their birth rates have been declining for centuries. Princess Lyrale is their last hope for continuing the royal bloodline. Their computers analyzed genetic data from every species in the Alliance. Somehow you came up as the optimal match." "Optimal match for what exactly?" "Producing viable offspring that could rule their empire." Elena's image flickered as the signal weakened. "Marcus, this isn't just about you. If you refuse, it could be seen as an insult to the Zephyrian crown. Relations between our species are already fragile. The Council thinks this could be an opportunity to strengthen the alliance." Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the metal floor. "So I'm supposed to marry some alien princess I've never met to keep the peace? What about what I want?" "I wish it were that simple. The edict was issued under the ancient compact of binding. It supersedes individual choice when the continuation of a royal line is at stake. Every member species agreed to honor these laws when they joined the alliance." The transmission began to break up, Elena's words becoming fragmented. "The transport ship, arriving in 6 days, prepare yourself, opportunity of a lifetime." The hologram dissolved, leaving Marcus alone with the royal document and his racing thoughts. He looked around his tiny quarters, the fold-out bunk, the micro-kitchen, the shelf of old Earth novels he'd brought from home. This wasn't much of a life, but it was his life. He'd worked hard for his independence, scraping together enough credits to lease this mining rig from the Terran Colonial Authority. Now some alien computer had decided his genetic material was suitable for producing royal heirs, and he was expected to abandon everything. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humans were considered second-class citizens throughout most of the galaxy, yet one of the oldest and most powerful empires wanted his DNA. Marcus pulled up his personal files on the computer terminal. His genetic scan results from his Colonial Authority physical showed the usual markers, Earth-human ancestry with some minor genetic variations common among Luna-born colonists. Nothing special that he could see. His medical history was unremarkable. No serious illnesses, no genetic diseases, excellent physical condition from years of manual labor. He'd grown up hearing stories about the old Earth, before humanity made contact with alien civilizations. In those days, humans had been alone in the universe, masters of their own destiny. Now they were junior partners in a vast galactic community, constantly proving they belonged. The Zephyrians were different from most Alliance species. They'd been spacefaring for thousands of years, building an empire that spanned dozens of star systems. Their technology was so advanced it seemed like magic to most other races. They rarely involved themselves in alliance politics, preferring to maintain their ancient traditions and customs. Marcus had seen images of Zephyrians before, tall, elegant beings with translucent blue skin and silver hair that seemed to move like liquid mercury. They were beautiful in an otherworldly way, but completely alien. The idea of marrying one, of trying to produce children with one, seemed impossible. His mining equipment beeped, indicating a successful scan had located a promising ore deposit. Under normal circumstances, this would have been cause for celebration. A good strike could pay for months of supplies and bring him closer to owning his own claim. Now it felt meaningless. Marcus suited up and headed to the mining platform, hoping the familiar routine of work might clear his head. The asteroid's low gravity made movement easy, but required constant attention to avoid floating away from the surface. He activated the plasma drill and began cutting into the rock, the superheated beam turning solid stone into vapor. As he worked, his mind wandered to the implications of the royal edict. If he went through with this marriage, he'd become part of the Zephyrian nobility. His children would be heirs to one of the most powerful thrones in the galaxy. It was the kind of opportunity most people could only dream of. But at what cost? He'd never see Earth again, never visit the Luna colonies where he'd grown up. He'd be trapped in a world of alien customs and expectations, forever marked as the human who married above his station. The Zephyrian court would probably see him as a necessary evil, a genetic donor rather than a real husband. The plasma drill struck a vein of rare metals, sending brilliant sparks across his helmet visor. The scanner showed high concentrations of iridium and platinum, a fortune in precious metals locked inside the asteroid's core. Under normal circumstances, this discovery would have set him up for life. Instead, Marcus found himself laughing at the absurdity. Here he was, striking it rich at the exact moment his entire life was being rearranged by forces beyond his control. The universe had a sense of humor, he had to give it that. His communication system crackled to life. "Chen, this is Transport Captain Rodriguez from the Alliance vessel Meridian. We're en route to your position with an estimated arrival time of 5 days. I understand you'll be traveling with us to Zephyros Prime." Marcus keyed his transmitter. "Captain, there might be some mistake. I haven't agreed to anything yet." "According to my orders, the Royal Edict supersedes personal choice in this matter. We're authorized to transport you by any means necessary." Rodriguez's tone was apologetic but firm. "I'd recommend coming willingly. It'll be more comfortable for everyone involved." The transmission ended, leaving Marcus floating beside his mining platform with a plasma drill in his hands and a head full of impossible decisions. The Alliance wasn't giving him a choice. They were treating this like a diplomatic imperative that couldn't be refused. He finished extracting the valuable ore, his movements automatic while his mind raced through possibilities. He could try to run, disappear into the outer rim where even Alliance ships rarely ventured. But that would make him a fugitive, and it would probably cause the exact diplomatic crisis everyone was trying to avoid. The alternative was to accept his fate and hope for the best. Maybe the princess would be understanding. Maybe the marriage would be purely ceremonial. Maybe he could find a way to make the best of an impossible situation. That evening, Marcus sat in his quarters reviewing everything he could find about Zephyrian culture. Their society was built around concepts of honor, duty, and genetic destiny. Royal marriages were sacred bonds that couldn't be broken once established. The princess would have as little choice in this matter as he did. He found images of Princess Lyrelei in the diplomatic archives. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps 25 in Earth years, though Zephyrians aged differently than humans. Her skin had the characteristic translucent blue tint of her species, and her silver hair fell in elaborate braids decorated with crystalline ornaments. Her eyes were large and dark, with an expression that seemed both regal and melancholy. The files described her as the last surviving member of the royal bloodline, following a plague that had devastated the Zephyrian nobility a decade earlier. She'd been raised in isolation, trained from birth to rule an empire, but apparently unable to produce the heirs necessary to continue her line. The genetic matching program was a last desperate attempt to save the dynasty. Marcus found himself feeling sympathy for her. If he was being forced into this marriage, she was equally trapped by duty and expectation. Neither of them had chosen this path, but both were expected to sacrifice their personal desires for the greater good of their respective species. He pulled up maps of the Zephyrian homeworld, trying to imagine what his new life might look like. The planet was mostly ocean, dotted with floating cities that hovered above the waves using anti-gravity technology. The royal palace was built on a massive crystal formation that rose from the deepest ocean trench. its spires reaching into the upper atmosphere. The thought of living in such a place filled him with equal parts wonder and dread. He'd spent his entire adult life in the harsh, practical environment of mining stations and colonial settlements. The idea of royal protocol, court ceremonies, and political intrigue was completely foreign to him. As the hours passed, Marcus found himself making lists of everything he'd need to arrange before leaving. His mining equipment would have to be sold or stored. His modest savings would need to be transferred to alliance banks that operated in Zephyrian space. His few personal belongings could fit in a single cargo container. The hardest part would be the messages he needed to send to his family back on Luna. His parents had sacrificed everything to give him the education and opportunities that led to his mining career. They'd be proud to hear their son was marrying royalty, but they'd also understand what he was giving up. His sister Maria would probably laugh at the absurdity of the situation. She'd always joked that Marcus was too stubborn and independent to ever settle down. The idea of him in an arranged marriage to an alien princess would strike her as cosmic justice. By the time he finally tried to sleep, Marcus had accepted the inevitable. He couldn't run from this responsibility, and he couldn't let his refusal damage relations between humans and one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. If he was going to do this, he'd do it with dignity and try to make the best of an impossible situation. His last conscious thought was a prayer to whatever gods might be listening that Princess Lyrelei would be as trapped and confused as he was, and that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make their forced partnership into something resembling a real marriage. The next morning brought a new message from the Zephyrian court. Along with detailed instructions for the wedding ceremony and his integration into royal society, there was a personal note from Princess Lyrelei herself. The translation software rendered her words in formal, stilted English, but the meaning was clear. Marcus Chen of Earth, I understand this union is as unwanted by you as it is by me. I ask only that you approach our marriage with honor and open minds. Perhaps we can find friendship in our shared obligation. For the first time since receiving the royal edict, Marcus smiled. Maybe this wouldn't be the disaster he'd imagined. Maybe, with luck and patience, it might even be the beginning of something good. The Alliance transport ship Meridian was larger than any vessel Marcus had ever seen up close. Its sleek hull stretched for nearly 2 kilometers, with weapon arrays and sensor pods that marked it as a diplomatic vessel capable of defending itself. As his mining shuttle approached the docking bay, Marcus felt a mix of excitement and dread that made his stomach churn. Captain Rodriguez met him at the airlock, a weathered woman whose handshake was firm and reassuring. Welcome aboard, Mr. Chen. I know this situation is unusual, but I want you to know that my crew and I will do everything possible to make your journey comfortable. Marcus shouldered his single duffel bag containing all his personal possessions. Thank you, Captain. I have to admit, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do once we reach Zephyros Prime. We have a full diplomatic briefing team aboard. Ambassador Chen, no relation, I assume, will be handling your cultural orientation and protocol training during the 3-week journey. Rodriguez led him through corridors lined with viewing ports showing the star field outside. I understand you've never been to a core world before. Never been off a mining platform except for supply runs to trade stations. Marcus paused to look out at a massive gas giant they were passing, its rings catching starlight like scattered diamonds. This is all new territory for me. His quarters were larger than his entire mining station had been, with a proper bed, a work desk, and even a small sitting area. A wall-mounted display showed their route to the Zephyrian homeworld, complete with estimated arrival times and cultural briefing schedules. Ambassador Chen arrived an hour after they departed, a distinguished older man whose diplomatic experience showed in every measured gesture. He carried a briefcase full of data tablets and cultural guides that looked intimidating enough to power a small space station. Mr. Chen, I'm honored to meet you. Your marriage to Princess Lyrelei represents a historic moment in human-alien relations. The ambassador settled into a chair across from Marcus's desk. I understand you've had very little preparation time, so we'll need to cover several centuries of Zephyrian culture and protocol in just 3 weeks. Several centuries? Marcus felt overwhelmed before they'd even started. Zephyrian society is built around ancient traditions that date back to their early spacefaring period. Royal marriages involve complex ceremonies that can take days to complete. You'll need to learn the proper forms of address, understand court hierarchy, and master at least basic conversational Zephyrian. The ambassador activated a holographic display showing the crystal spires of the royal palace. The good news is that Princess Lyrale specifically requested that human customs be incorporated into the ceremony. She seems genuinely interested in making this work for both of you. Over the following days, Marcus immersed himself in crash courses on alien culture that made his head spin. Zephyrian society was incredibly complex, with social rules that governed everything from how to hold eating utensils to the proper way to bow to different ranks of nobility. The language was tonal, requiring precise inflections that could change meaning entirely. "Your pronunciation is improving," said Dr. Sarah Kim, the ship's xenolinguist, during one of their daily language sessions. "But remember, when addressing the princess directly, you must use the highest formal register. Any mistake could be interpreted as disrespect." Marcus practiced the phrases until his throat was sore. The Zephyrian words felt strange on his tongue, full of flowing vowels and subtle consonants that had no equivalent in any Earth language. Simple concepts like hello required careful attention to pitch and emphasis. The cultural briefings were equally challenging. Zephyrian nobles expected their spouses to be well-versed in art, literature, and political theory that spanned millennia. Marcus found himself studying abstract philosophy and analyzing poetry written by beings who'd lived for centuries. "Don't try to memorize everything," advised Ambassador Chen during one particularly frustrating session. "Focus on showing respect and genuine interest. Zephyrians value sincerity above perfect knowledge." The physical preparation was easier but no less important. Dr. Martinez, the ship's medical officer, explained the biological compatibility between humans and Zephyrians while running Marcus through a battery of tests and genetic adjustments. "The good news is that your species are surprisingly compatible, considering you evolved on different worlds," Dr. Martinez said, reviewing the test results. "We'll need to make some minor adjustments to your immune system to prevent adverse reactions, but nothing that will change your fundamental biology." Marcus submitted to daily treatments that would allow him to safely live in the Zephyrian environment. Their homeworld had different atmospheric composition, different gravity, and exposure to types of radiation that could be harmful to unprotected humans. Between formal lessons, Marcus spent hours in the ship's observation lounges, watching the galaxy pass by outside. They traveled through systems he'd only heard about in stories, past worlds where entire civilizations had risen and fallen. The scale of everything was humbling. He was just one human on a ship carrying him toward a destiny he'd never imagined. During the second week of their journey, Marcus received another personal message from Princess Lyrale. The translation was clearer this time, suggesting she'd been practicing her English as much as he'd been studying Zephyrian. "Marcus, I hope your journey proceeds well. I have been reviewing human customs and find them fascinating in their directness. I confess I am nervous about our meeting, but also curious. Perhaps we might correspond during your travel time so that we are not complete strangers when we meet." Marcus spent hours crafting his reply, trying to strike the right balance between formal respect and genuine warmth. He told her about his background as a miner, his love of old Earth literature, and his hopes that they could find common ground despite their different worlds. Her responses came daily after that, each one revealing more of her personality beyond the formal princess role. She was intelligent and well-educated, but also isolated and lonely. She'd spent her entire life preparing to rule, but had never been allowed normal friendships or relationships. "I have never seen a mining operation," she wrote in one message. "Your descriptions of asteroid fields and plasma drills sound like adventures from ancient stories. I envy your freedom to choose your own path, even though I understand duty must sometimes override personal desire." Marcus found himself looking forward to her messages more than any other part of his day. Slowly, through their correspondence, he began to see her as a person rather than an abstract alien princess. She had hopes and fears just like any human, and she was facing the same uncertainties about their arranged marriage. The third week brought intensive training in royal protocol. Ambassador Chen drilled Marcus on proper behavior during the wedding ceremony, the correct forms of address for different court officials, and the complex etiquette surrounding royal meals and social functions. Remember, during the ceremony of genetic bonding, you must remain completely still while the ceremonial crystals are activated, the ambassador explained. Any movement could disrupt the harmonic frequencies and be seen as rejection of the bond. Marcus practiced standing motionless for hours at a time, learning to control his breathing and ignore physical discomfort. The ceremony would involve exposure to energy fields that could be painful for humans, but showing any reaction would be considered a grave insult. The hardest part of the protocol training involved learning to navigate Zephyrian court politics. The princess had many relatives and advisors who saw the human marriage as either a desperate necessity or a dangerous contamination of royal bloodlines. Duchess Alareth will be your most vocal opponent, Ambassador Chen warned. She believes the royal line should remain genetically pure, even if it means extinction. She'll be looking for any excuse to declare the marriage invalid. Marcus studied holographic profiles of every major court figure, memorizing their relationships, allegiances, and potential motivations. The political landscape was as complex as any Earth government, but with the added complications of alien psychology and thousand-year-old grudges. As they approached the Zephyrian home system, Marcus received his final message from Princess Lyrale before their meeting. Her words were both encouraging and ominous. Marcus, tomorrow we meet face to face for the first time. I want you to know that regardless of the circumstances that brought us together, I am grateful for your willingness to honor this bond. I have read your messages many times and believe you are a good man. Whatever challenges we face, we will face them together. The royal escort arrived as they entered Zephyrian space, a formation of sleek vessels that looked more like artworks than warships. Their hulls were crystalline, catching and reflecting light in patterns that constantly shifted. Captain Rodriguez handed command over to the escort commander with military precision. Marcus stood at the observation deck watching the Zephyrian homeworld grow larger as they approached. The planet was even more beautiful than the images had suggested, with swirling blue-green oceans and floating cities that gleamed like jewels against the water. The royal palace rose from the center of the largest ocean, its crystal spires reaching towards space. "Final approach commencing," announced Captain Rodriguez over the ship's communication system. "Mr. Chen, you're requested to report to the diplomatic shuttle bay for transfer to the palace." Marcus gathered his belongings, such as they were, and made his way to the shuttle bay. Ambassador Chen was waiting with a formal diplomatic uniform that had been specially tailored for the occasion. "Remember everything we've practiced," the ambassador said as Marcus changed into the unfamiliar clothing. "Show respect, follow protocol, but don't be afraid to let your humanity show through. That's what makes this alliance meaningful." The diplomatic shuttle was another marvel of Zephyrian technology, its cabin filled with harmonic tones that seemed to respond to the passengers' emotional states. As they descended toward the palace, Marcus caught his first glimpse of Zephyrian citizens going about their daily lives in the floating cities below. They were as graceful and elegant as the images had suggested, moving through their crystal cities with a fluid grace that seemed almost like dancing. Children played in parks that defied gravity, their laughter carrying on the wind. Despite their alien appearance, there was something unmistakably familiar about their family groups and social interactions. The shuttle landed on a platform high in the palace spires, where a reception committee waited in formal robes that seemed to be made of crystallized light. Marcus recognized several faces from his diplomatic briefings, including the stern Duchess Alareth, whose expression suggested she was attending a funeral rather than a wedding preparation. But his attention was immediately drawn to the figure standing at the center of the reception group. Princess Lyrale was even more beautiful in person than her holographic images had suggested, but it was her expression that caught him off guard. Instead of the formal mask he'd expected, she looked genuinely nervous and hopeful, her dark eyes searching his face for some sign of acceptance or rejection. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the landing platform, two people thrown together by cosmic forces beyond their control, trying to read each other's intentions and fears. Then Princess Lyrale stepped forward and spoke in carefully practiced English. "Welcome to Zephyros Prime, Marcus Chen of Earth. I hope our worlds can find harmony through our union." Marcus drew on all his protocol training and bowed in the formal manner Ambassador Chen had drilled into him. "Thank you for welcoming me, Your Highness. I am honored by your gracious reception." But when he straightened, he abandoned formality and spoke from the heart. "I'm nervous as hell if you want to know the truth, but I'm glad to finally meet the person behind all those messages." A ripple of shock went through the assembled court officials at his informal language, but Princess Lyrelay smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from any Zephyrian. In that moment, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this impossible marriage might actually work. The royal quarters assigned to Marcus were larger than some space stations he'd visited, with crystal walls that offered panoramic views of the floating cities below. Everything was designed for beings twice his height, making him feel like a child playing in an adult's home. The furniture could be adjusted for human proportions, but the sheer scale of everything reminded him constantly that he was the alien here. Princess Lyrelay had requested a private dinner before the formal court presentations began, a suggestion that had scandalized some of the older courtiers, but which Marcus appreciated. The thought of navigating Zephyrian politics while trying to get to know his future wife seemed overwhelming. She arrived at his quarters precisely at sunset, accompanied by only a single advisor rather than the full entourage he'd expected. Up close, Marcus could see the subtle differences that marked her as royalty. Her skin had a more pronounced luminescence than other Zephyrians he'd seen, and her silver hair seemed to move with its own internal current. "I hope these accommodations are suitable," she said, gesturing to the expansive rooms. "I asked the palace staff to include some items from Earth to make you more comfortable." Marcus noticed for the first time the small touches that had been added. A coffee maker that looked suspiciously like one from Luna Colony, books in English scattered on the reading table, and what appeared to be an attempt at recreating Earth-style furniture. "Thank you, this is more luxury than I've ever experienced." He gestured toward the seating area. "Though I have to admit, I'm not sure about the proper protocol for having dinner with a princess." "Perhaps we could dispense with protocol for this evening," Lyrelay suggested, her formal posture relaxing slightly. "I would prefer to speak with Marcus the Minor rather than rehearse speeches with a future prince consort." They settled into chairs that adjusted automatically to accommodate their different physiologies. The meal that arrived was an interesting fusion of Zephyrian and human cuisines. Familiar proteins prepared with alien spices, vegetables that had been bioengineered to suit human nutritional needs. "I've been studying human culture since we began corresponding," Lyrelay said, using eating utensils that had been modified for human hands. "Your species has a fascinating relationship with individual choice. On Zephyros, duty and bloodline determine most life paths." "It's not that different for most humans," Marcus replied. "I was lucky enough to choose my own path, but plenty of people end up trapped by circumstances beyond their control, like both of us, I suppose." Lyrelay nodded thoughtfully. "I have never made a single major decision about my own life. Where to live, what to study, whom to marry, all determined by advisors and ancient laws. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to simply choose to leave everything behind and start over somewhere new." "It's terrifying," Marcus said honestly, "but also liberating. When I left Luna to become a minor, I had no idea if I'd succeed or fail. The uncertainty was scary, but it was my uncertainty, you know." As the evening progressed, their conversation grew more comfortable and natural. Lyrelay spoke about her education in statecraft and diplomacy, her love of ancient Zephyrian poetry, and her frustration with the isolation that came with royal status. Marcus told her about life on the mining platforms, the satisfaction of finding valuable ore deposits, and his collection of old Earth novels. "I've been reading human literature to try to understand your cultural perspectives," she said. "I found a story called Pride and Prejudice that seems remarkably relevant to our situation." Marcus laughed. "Jane Austen writing about arranged marriages between different social classes. Yeah, I can see the connection, though I'm pretty sure Elizabeth Bennet never had to worry about genetic compatibility algorithms. The fundamental challenge is the same, two people from different worlds trying to find common ground." Lyrelay paused, then asked quietly, "Are you angry about being forced into this marriage?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I was at first, but anger doesn't change the situation, and after talking with you these past weeks, I'm cautiously optimistic that we can make this work. I am grateful for your open mind. Many humans in your position might harbor resentment toward my people for disrupting their chosen life path. To be honest, my chosen life path wasn't that impressive. working alone in an asteroid field, saving credits to maybe buy my own mining claim someday. It was a simple life, but not necessarily a meaningful one. Before Lyrale could respond, her advisor stepped forward and whispered something in rapid Zephyrian. Her expression grew serious, and she turned back to Marcus with visible reluctance. I apologize, but we must discuss tomorrow's ceremonies. The court has prepared an extensive schedule of presentations and ritual observances that will formally introduce you to our people. Marcus felt the relaxed atmosphere of their dinner evaporate as reality reasserted itself. What exactly am I supposed to do at these ceremonies? The advisor, an elderly Zephyrian named Lord Matthias, produced a data tablet covered with scheduling information. You will be presented to each of the major noble houses, undergo the ritual of ancestral recognition, participate in the ceremony of genetic harmony, and conclude with the formal declaration of intent. And I'm supposed to remember all the proper protocols for each of these events. Any mistake will be seen as disrespect toward our entire civilization, Lord Matthias said sternly. Perhaps it would be better to postpone the marriage until the human has received proper education in our customs. Marcus saw the flash of anger in Lyrale's eyes before she responded in a calm, measured tone. Lord Matthias, Marcus has received excellent diplomatic training during his journey here. I have confidence in his ability to conduct himself appropriately. Your Highness, with respect, this human's background is entirely inappropriate for royal marriage. He has no noble lineage, no education in statecraft, no understanding of the responsibilities that come with ruling an interstellar empire. Marcus felt his own temper starting to rise at the condescending tone, but Lyrale spoke before he could respond. Lord Matthias, you seem to be forgetting that our genetic compatibility algorithms selected Marcus from among billions of candidates across hundreds of species. If our most advanced technology determined that he is the optimal choice for ensuring the continuation of our bloodline, perhaps we should trust that wisdom rather than questioning it. The rebuke was delivered with royal authority that brooked no argument, but Marcus could see the political undercurrents at work. There were clearly factions within the court that opposed this marriage, and Lord Matthias was either their representative or their pawn. After the advisor departed, Marcus and Lyrale walked out onto a balcony that overlooked the floating cities. The alien stars were beginning to appear overhead, constellations that had no names in any human language. I should warn you, Lyrale said quietly, tomorrow will be difficult. There are those who hope to see you fail, who believe this marriage will weaken our bloodline and our empire. Any advice on how to handle the opposition? Be yourself. Show them that humans possess qualities our people have forgotten: adaptability, resilience, the ability to thrive in difficult circumstances. Those are traits our empire needs if it's going to survive in a changing galaxy. Marcus looked out at the crystal spires rising from the ocean depths, trying to imagine himself as part of this impossibly advanced civilization. What if I can't live up to their expectations? What if I'm just a miner who got lucky with the genetic lottery? Lyrale turned to face him directly, her dark eyes serious in the reflected light of the floating cities. Marcus, do you know why our birth rates have been declining for centuries? I assumed it was some kind of biological problem. It's cultural stagnation. We've become so focused on maintaining genetic purity and following ancient traditions that we've forgotten how to adapt to changing circumstances. Our people have lost the ability to take risks, to try new approaches, to embrace change. She gestured toward the cities below them. These floating cities, our crystal technology, our interstellar empire, all of it was built by ancestors who were willing to take incredible risks. They didn't worry about maintaining genetic purity or following every ancient protocol. They did what was necessary to survive and prosper. And you think bringing a human into the royal bloodline will somehow revive that spirit? I think it's our only hope. The genetic algorithms didn't just select you for biological compatibility. They were programmed to identify traits that could strengthen our civilization. Your willingness to leave everything familiar and venture into the unknown, your ability to thrive in harsh conditions, your independence and adaptability, these are exactly the qualities our people need to rediscover. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like gravity from a heavy planet. This wasn't just about marriage or producing heirs. He was being asked to help save an entire civilization from its own rigid traditions. "No pressure at all," he said with weak humor. Lyrelay smiled at his attempt at levity. "I won't lie to you, the challenges ahead will be significant, but I believe we can face them together. In your human literature, don't the best stories involve unlikely heroes who rise to meet impossible challenges? Usually after lots of struggle and setbacks, and sometimes the heroes don't survive to see the happy ending. Then we will have to write our own story with better outcomes." They spent the rest of the evening reviewing the protocols for the next day's ceremonies, with Lyrelay patiently explaining the historical significance of each ritual. Marcus practiced the formal bows, memorized the proper responses to ceremonial questions, and tried to understand the complex web of relationships between different noble houses. "The key thing to remember," Lyrelay explained, "is that each ceremony serves a specific purpose in establishing your legitimacy as a royal consort. The nobles aren't just evaluating your knowledge of protocol. They're trying to determine whether you have the strength and intelligence to help rule an empire. What happens if I fail these tests? The marriage contract can be voided if the court determines that you are fundamentally unsuitable for royal responsibilities. You would be returned to human space with our gratitude for your willingness to attempt the bond." Marcus understood the subtext. Failure would mean diplomatic embarrassment for humanity and the loss of a unique opportunity to strengthen the alliance. The pressure was immense, but he found himself thinking about all the miners and colonists back in human space who were counting on him to succeed. As the evening wound down, Lyrelay stood to leave but paused at the door. "Marcus, I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, I'm grateful to have met you. For the first time in my life, I feel like I have a true partner rather than just another advisor telling me what duty requires." After she left, Marcus stood on the balcony looking out at the alien stars and thinking about the journey that had brought him here. A few weeks ago, he'd been nobody special, just another human trying to make a living in the vast galaxy. Now he was on the verge of becoming a prince of one of the most powerful empires in known space. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humans were considered newcomers to galactic civilization, barely tolerated by most alien species. Yet here he was, being asked to help revitalize a culture that was thousands of years old. Maybe that was exactly why the genetic algorithms had chosen him, because his people were still young enough to remember how to take risks and adapt to new circumstances. Tomorrow would bring tests he couldn't fully prepare for, but at least he wouldn't face them alone. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he and Lyrelay would meet them as partners. And maybe, if they were very lucky, they might even find love along the way. The ceremony of ancestral recognition began at dawn in the palace's grand hall, a vast chamber whose crystal walls had been carved from a single massive formation deep beneath the ocean floor. Thousands of years of Zephyrian history were etched into those walls, telling the story of an empire that had risen from a single planet to span dozens of star systems. Marcus stood before the assembled court wearing ceremonial robes that had been specially designed to blend human and Zephyrian traditions. The fabric seemed to shift color with his movements, responding to his nervous energy with subtle patterns of light. Around him, hundreds of nobles watched with expressions ranging from curious interest to barely concealed hostility. Princess Lyrelay took her place beside him, wearing the formal regalia of the royal bloodline. In the morning light streaming through the crystal ceiling, she looked more like a figure from mythology than a real person. But when she caught his eye and gave him an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement, Marcus remembered the woman he'd shared dinner with the night before. High Priestess Zaline approached, carrying the ancestral matrix, a crystalline device that supposedly contained the genetic memories of every Zephyrian ruler for the past 5,000 years. According to the briefings Marcus had received, this ceremony would test whether his genetic pattern was truly compatible with the royal bloodline. "Marcus Chen of the human species," the High Priestess intoned, her voice carrying clearly through the vast hall, "do you submit yourself willingly to the judgment of the ancestors?" "I do," Marcus replied, using the formal response he'd memorized. The words felt strange in his mouth, but his pronunciation was clear enough to earn nods of approval from some of the assembled nobles. The ancestral matrix began to glow as the High Priestess activated its ancient mechanisms. Energy patterns swirled within the crystal, forming complex geometric shapes that seemed to respond to Marcus's presence. According to the ceremony's traditions, The ancestors would either accept him as worthy of joining the bloodline or reject him as genetically incompatible. Marcus felt a tingling sensation as the device scanned his biological patterns, comparing them against 5 millennia of royal genetics. The process was supposedly painless, but there was an odd pressure in his head, as if something was examining his thoughts and memories. The scanning continued for several minutes while the court watched in tense silence. Marcus tried to remain motionless as he'd been instructed, but sweat was starting to form under his ceremonial robes. The pressure in his head was growing stronger, and he began to see flashes of images that weren't his own memories. Suddenly, the ancestral matrix flared with brilliant light, and Marcus saw visions that seemed to come from outside his own experience. He watched Zephyrian explorers launching the first interstellar expeditions, saw the construction of the floating cities, witnessed the rise and fall of noble houses across centuries of history. But mixed in with these alien memories were scenes that seemed distinctly human: spacecraft launching from Earth, colonists building settlements on hostile worlds, miners like himself working in asteroid fields throughout human space. It was as if the Matrix was recognizing commonalities between human and Zephyrian experiences. When the scanning finally ended, the High Priestess studied the patterns within the crystal with visible surprise. She consulted with other court officials in rapid Zephyrian, their expressions growing more animated as they examined the results. "The ancestors have rendered their judgment," she announced finally. "The human genetic pattern shows not merely compatibility with the royal bloodline, but enhancement potential. The union is not only acceptable, it is strongly recommended for the strengthening of our people." A murmur of surprise rippled through the assembled court. Marcus caught sight of Duchess Alarith's expression, which suggested she'd just witnessed something impossible and deeply disturbing. Lord Matthias stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "High Priestess, surely there must be some error in the readings. How can a primitive human genetic pattern enhance our royal bloodline?" "The ancestors' judgment is clear," the High Priestess replied firmly. "The human brings genetic diversity that our bloodline has lacked for centuries. More importantly, his species possesses adaptive traits that could help our people navigate the challenges of a changing galaxy." Marcus felt relief wash over him as the first ceremony concluded successfully, but he could see from the nobles' expressions that the political battle was far from over. The ancestral matrix had validated his genetic suitability, but that only meant he could proceed to the more challenging trials ahead. The ritual of genetic harmony took place in the palace's biosynthesis chamber, a room filled with medical equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction novel. Dr. Kethvar, the court's chief geneticist, explained the process while technicians prepared the scanning apparatus. "This ceremony will demonstrate the actual biological compatibility between your genetic patterns and Princess Lyraleigh's," Dr. Kethvar said. "We will simulate the genetic combination process to verify that viable offspring are possible." Marcus underwent hours of medical scans while the assembled court watched from an observation gallery above. The process was intimate and somewhat embarrassing, but he focused on the knowledge that this was necessary to satisfy Zephyrian law and tradition. When Princess Lyraleigh joined him for the compatibility testing, the scientific equipment registered harmonic resonances that had the medical staff exchanging excited whispers. The genetic simulation showed not only viable offspring, but enhanced traits that combined the best characteristics of both species. "Remarkable," Dr. Kethvar announced to the court. "The projected offspring would possess Zephyrian cognitive abilities enhanced by human adaptability and resilience. This combination could produce individuals uniquely suited for leadership in a diverse galactic community." Even Duchess Alarith seemed momentarily speechless at the medical evidence. Whatever objections she'd planned to raise about genetic incompatibility had been thoroughly refuted by the very technology her own people had developed. The final ceremony of the day was the formal declaration of intent, held in the palace's throne room under the watchful eyes of portraits depicting 5,000 years of Zephyrian rulers. This was where Marcus would either be formally accepted as a future prince consort or rejected as unsuitable for royal responsibilities. Princess Lyraleigh took her place on the ancient throne that had been carved from a single massive crystal. The light streaming through it created rainbow patterns that seemed to dance around her like living things. When she spoke, Her voice carried the full authority of her bloodline. Noble houses of Zephyros, you have witnessed the judgment of our ancestors and the testimony of our science. Both have declared Marcus Chen of Earth to be not merely suitable for royal marriage, but beneficial to our people's future. She gestured for Marcus to step forward into the center of the throne room, where he could be seen clearly by all the assembled nobles. I now ask the formal question required by our law. Are there any among you who would challenge this human's worthiness to join our royal family? The silence stretched for several heartbeats before Duchess Alarith rose from her seat among the senior nobles. Marcus felt his stomach clench as she prepared to speak. Your Highness, I do not question the human's genetic compatibility or the scientific evidence of enhanced offspring. However, I must ask whether he possesses the political wisdom and strength of character necessary to help rule an interstellar empire. Murmurs of agreement rippled through portions of the court. This was the challenge Marcus had been dreading, not an attack on his biology, but on his qualifications for leadership. Princess Lyrale's expression remained neutral, but Marcus caught a flash of anger in her eyes. What specific test would you propose, Duchess? Let him demonstrate his ability to navigate a crisis that requires both diplomatic skill and decisive action. Present him with a scenario that our own nobles would struggle to resolve, and let him show whether he possesses the judgment necessary for royal responsibility. The suggestion was clearly a trap, designed to put Marcus in an impossible situation where failure would justify rejecting the marriage. But before Princess Lyrale could object, Marcus stepped forward. I accept the Duchess's challenge, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the throne room. Present your scenario, and I'll do my best to prove worthy of the trust you're considering placing in me. A buzz of excitement went through the court. This kind of political theater was rare in the normally sedate world of Zephyrian nobility, and everyone was eager to see how the human would handle himself under pressure. Duchess Alarith smiled with predatory satisfaction as she outlined her scenario. A rebellion has erupted in the Vega sector, led by a charismatic human named David Torres, who claims that the Alliance discriminates against younger species. He has captured 3 Zephyrian trade vessels and is threatening to execute the crews unless we grant independence to all human colonies in Alliance space. The scenario was clearly designed to put Marcus in an impossible position. He would either have to authorize military action against his own species or appear weak by giving in to terrorist demands. Either choice would provide ammunition for those who opposed the marriage. But Marcus had spent 3 years working in the Outer Rim, dealing with exactly the kind of desperate people who might turn to piracy or rebellion. He understood the pressures that could drive someone to extreme measures, and he suspected there was more to this scenario than simple terrorism. My first question, Marcus said, is what specific discriminatory actions led to this rebellion? Rebellions don't happen in a vacuum. There's usually a legitimate grievance underneath the extreme tactics. The question caught Duchess Alarith off guard. She'd expected him to either advocate for military action or immediate surrender, not to dig into the root causes of the conflict. The rebels claim their colonies receive inadequate representation in alliance councils, and that their trade routes are subject to unfair taxation, Lord Matthias supplied, apparently trying to help his ally regain control of the scenario. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. And how long have these grievances been brought to the Alliance's attention through proper diplomatic channels? Several years, admitted another noble. But surely legitimate grievances don't justify piracy and kidnapping. Of course not, Marcus agreed. But understanding the underlying causes helps us craft a solution that addresses both the immediate crisis and the long-term stability issues. He began outlining a multi-pronged approach that combined immediate humanitarian concerns with longer-term political reforms. First, he would establish direct communication with Torres to verify the safety of the Zephyrian crew members and establish terms for their safe release. Simultaneously, he would initiate emergency alliance council sessions to address the legitimate grievances that had motivated the rebellion. The key, Marcus explained, is to separate Torres from any potential supporters by demonstrating that we're serious about addressing the underlying problems. Most rebels aren't committed extremists. They're desperate people who feel they have no other options. As he continued developing his response to the crisis scenario, Marcus could see the expressions in the throne room changing. The nobles were listening intently, and even Duchess Alareth seemed surprised by the sophistication of his political analysis. Once we've isolated the hardcore rebels and addressed the legitimate grievances, we can move to the final phase, Marcus concluded. Tors and his immediate followers will need to face justice for their crimes, but within a framework that demonstrates our commitment to fair treatment for all Alliance members. The throne room fell silent as the assembled nobles absorbed his presentation. Marcus had avoided the trap entirely by refusing to treat the scenario as a simple choice between force and capitulation. Instead, he demonstrated exactly the kind of nuanced thinking that effective leadership required. Princess Lyrelay spoke into the silence with obvious pride in her voice. Are there any other challenges to Marcus Chen's suitability for royal marriage? This time, no one stood to object. Even Duchess Alareth remained seated, her expression thoughtful rather than hostile. Then I formally declare my intent to marry Marcus Chen of Earth, with the full support and blessing of our noble houses. Let the union be celebrated throughout our empire as the beginning of a new era in our people's history. The formal ceremonies were complete, but Marcus knew that the real challenges were just beginning. He'd passed the tests required by Zephyrian law and tradition, but now he had to prove himself worthy of the trust that Princess Lyrelay and her people were placing in him. As the court began to disperse, Princess Lyrelay approached him with a smile that seemed to light up the crystal chamber. "Well done," she said quietly. "I think you've surprised them in the best possible way." Marcus felt exhausted but oddly exhilarated. Does this mean I passed? This means we can finally start planning our future together. The formal marriage ceremony is still weeks away, but the political obstacles have been cleared. As they walked together from the throne room, Marcus realized that somewhere during the day's ceremonies, his perspective had fundamentally shifted. He was no longer thinking about this marriage as something being imposed on him by forces beyond his control. Instead, he was beginning to see it as an opportunity to build something meaningful with a remarkable woman who was becoming far more than just an alien princess he'd been ordered to marry. The challenges ahead would be immense, but for the first time since receiving that royal edict, Marcus Chen felt ready to embrace his destiny as a bridge between two very different worlds. The wedding ceremony took place 3 weeks later during the Festival of Harmonic Convergence, when Zephyros Prime's 3 moons aligned to create spectacular tidal resonances that made the floating cities ring like massive bells. Marcus stood in the Crystal Cathedral, a transparent structure that seemed to hang in space above the deepest ocean trench, watching alien constellations wheel overhead while trying to calm his racing heart. The cathedral was filled with representatives from across the galaxy, not just Zephyrian nobles, but ambassadors from every major alliance species. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a dying bloodline had become a symbol of cooperation between very different civilizations. Ambassador Chen stood beside Marcus as his best man, wearing formal diplomatic robes that somehow managed to look both human and appropriately ceremonial for the alien setting. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly as the processional music began. "Terrified and exhilarated in equal measure," Marcus admitted. "A few months ago, I was a nobody miner in an asteroid field. Now I'm about to become a prince of the galaxy's oldest empire." "Your parents are watching the ceremony via subspace relay," the ambassador said with a smile. "Your mother wanted me to tell you how proud they are, and your father says to remember that underneath all the fancy clothes and alien customs, you're still the same person who had the courage to leave Luna Colony and make his own way in the galaxy." The ceremonial horns announced the arrival of the bridal party, and Marcus felt his breath catch as Princess Lyrelay appeared at the cathedral entrance. She wore traditional Zephyrian wedding attire that seemed to be woven from crystallized starlight, but she'd also incorporated human elements. A veil that had belonged to Marcus's grandmother, and a bouquet that included flowers from both Earth and Zephyros Prime. As she walked down the aisle toward him, Marcus was struck by how much their relationship had changed over the past month. What had begun as duty and mutual respect had slowly evolved into genuine affection and partnership. They'd spent hours planning not just their wedding but their future together, discussing how to blend their very different backgrounds into something new and meaningful. The ceremony itself was a fascinating fusion of traditions. High Priestess Zaline conducted the ritual elements required by Zephyrian law, while Ambassador Chen performed the human marriage customs that Marcus had requested. When it came time to exchange vows, they spoke words they had written together that reflected both their species' values. "Marcus Chen of Earth," Lyrelay said, her voice carrying clearly through the crystal cathedral. "I promise to stand with you as we face the challenges ahead, to learn from your people's courage and adaptability, and to build a future that honors both our worlds." "Princess Lyrelay of Zephyros," Marcus replied, "I promise to support you as we work to strengthen your people and mine, to bring fresh perspectives to ancient traditions, and to prove that love can grow even from the most unlikely beginnings." The ceremony of genetic bonding that followed was unlike anything in human experience. The cathedral filled with harmonic resonances that seemed to come from the planet itself, while crystalline formations around the altar created energy patterns that Marcus could feel in his bones. According to Zephyrian belief, this process would create a spiritual connection between them that would last for multiple lifetimes. Marcus wasn't sure what to expect, but as the energy fields intensified, he began to sense Lyrelay's emotions as if they were his own. He felt her nervousness, her hope, her determination to make their marriage work, and underneath it all, the beginning of something that might actually be love. When the ceremony concluded, and they were officially declared married, the celebration that followed lasted for 3 days and included cultural performances from dozens of different species. Marcus found himself dancing to alien music, sampling foods he couldn't identify, and somehow managing to hold conversations with beings who communicated through color changes or harmonic patterns. But the real test of their marriage began after the celebration ended, when they had to settle into the daily reality of ruling an interstellar empire together. The first crisis came just 2 weeks after their wedding, when the rebellion scenario that Duchess Alareth had presented as a hypothetical test became depressingly real. David Torres had indeed captured Zephyrian trade vessels, and his demands for colonial independence were spreading throughout human space like wildfire. The Alliance Council was demanding immediate military action, while human colonial leaders were calling for negotiations that could address legitimate grievances. Marcus and Lyrelay worked together to craft a response that drew on both their perspectives. They opened direct communication with Torres while simultaneously preparing military options, demonstrating that they were serious about both justice and peace. Lyrelay's political experience helped navigate the complex web of alliance politics, while Marcus's understanding of human colonial psychology provided insights into the rebels' motivations. "The key," Marcus explained during a strategy session with the Royal Council, "is to show the colonial populations that their grievances can be addressed through legitimate channels. Torres is betting that desperation will drive people to support extreme measures, but if we can demonstrate real progress on the underlying issues, his support will evaporate." The approach worked exactly as Marcus had predicted. Within 6 months, the rebellion had collapsed as moderate colonial leaders chose negotiation over violence. Torres was captured and tried for his crimes, but within a framework that included significant reforms to Alliance colonial policy. The successful resolution of the crisis established Marcus and Lyrelay as effective partners in governing the Empire, but it also highlighted how much they still had to learn about each other. Lyrelay's approach to politics was subtle and patient, building consensus through careful relationship management. Marcus preferred more direct action, cutting through complex protocols to focus on practical solutions. "Sometimes I think we're too different to make this work," Lyrelay confided during one of their private dinners overlooking the floating cities. "You approach every problem like an engineer solving a mechanical puzzle. I see everything in terms of relationships and long-term consequences." "Maybe that's why we work so well together," Marcus replied. "You keep me from breaking things that can't be easily repaired, and I keep you from getting lost in analysis paralysis. Besides, our differences are what make our conversations interesting." Their personal relationship continued to evolve as well. The political partnership had developed naturally from their shared responsibilities, but the emotional connection took more time and effort to cultivate. They came from such different worlds, literally and figuratively, that simple things like humor or expressions of affection required constant translation and negotiation. But gradually, they began to find their rhythm as a couple. Marcus learned to appreciate the subtle beauty of Zephyrian art and literature, while Lyrelay developed a fascination with human exploration stories and the courage required to venture into the unknown. They established traditions that blended their cultures, quiet Earth-style breakfast conversations accompanied by Zephyrian harmonic music, evening walks through the palace gardens where they shared stories from their very different childhoods. The announcement of Lyrelay's pregnancy came 18 months after their wedding, during the celebration of the anniversary of their first meeting. The news sent waves of excitement throughout the Zephyrian Empire and brought delegations from across human space to congratulate them. "Our child will be truly unique," Lyrelay said as they stood together on the same balcony where they'd shared their first private conversation. "Neither fully human nor fully Zephyrian, but something new, a bridge between our peoples." Marcus placed his hand on her still flat stomach, trying to imagine the life growing inside her. According to the medical projections, their child would possess enhanced cognitive abilities from the Zephyrian side combined with human adaptability and resilience. More importantly, he or she would grow up bilingual and bicultural, equally at home in both worlds. "I just hope we can give our child the freedom to choose their own path," Marcus said. "Royal duty is important, but so is individual choice." "We'll find a way to balance both," Lyrelay assured him. "Our child will understand their responsibilities to our peoples, but they'll also know that they have the strength to forge their own destiny if necessary." The birth of Prince David Lyrelos Chen created a sensation that extended far beyond the Zephyrian Empire. The first human Zephyrian hybrid represented a new kind of galactic citizen, equally at home with both species' cultures and traditions. More importantly, his very existence proved that the galaxy's different races could not only coexist, but could create something beautiful together. As Marcus held his son for the first time, looking into eyes that seemed to shift between human brown and Zephyrian silver, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He'd gone from being a lonely miner in an asteroid field to becoming a father and prince, but the core of who he was hadn't changed. He was still the same person who valued honesty, hard work, and the courage to face the unknown. "What are you thinking about?" Lyrelay asked from the medical bed, watching him cradle their child. "I'm thinking about that royal edict that started all this," Marcus said. "At the time, it felt like the end of my freedom, like I was being forced to give up everything I'd worked for. But it turns out it was actually the beginning of the life I was meant to live." Lyrelay smiled at him with an expression that was pure love, no longer complicated by duty or political necessity. "Do you ever regret leaving your mining station?" Marcus looked down at his son, then out the window at the floating cities that were now his home, then back at his wife who had become his partner in every sense of the word. "Not for a second," he said honestly. "Sometimes the best journeys are the ones you never planned to take." Over the following years, Marcus and Lyrelay's partnership became a model for cooperation between different species throughout the Alliance. They established cultural exchange programs that allowed humans to study on Zephyros Prime, while sending Zephyrian scholars to Earth and the human colonies. Their son grew up switching effortlessly between languages and customs, equally comfortable at formal court ceremonies and informal human gatherings. The royal bloodline that had seemed doomed to extinction was revitalized, but more importantly, both the human and Zephyrian civilizations found new strength through their connection. The humans gained access to advanced Zephyrian technology and philosophical traditions, while the Zephyrians rediscovered the adaptability and courage that had once made their empire great. Marcus never stopped being amazed by the twists of fate that had brought him to this life. A computer algorithm designed to save an alien bloodline had somehow identified exactly the kind of partnership both species needed to thrive in an uncertain galaxy. What had begun as a marriage of political necessity had become a love story that inspired beings across the stars. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they watched their son play with children from a dozen different species in the palace gardens, Marcus realized that the royal edict had given him something far more valuable than he'd lost. He'd traded a simple life as an independent miner for the complex responsibilities of helping guide two civilizations into the future. But he'd gained a family, a purpose, and a love that transcended the boundaries between worlds. "Any regrets?" Lyrelay asked, echoing her question from years earlier. Marcus pulled her close and watched their son laugh with pure joy as he chased other children through gardens that bloomed with flowers from across the galaxy. "Only that it took a royal edict to bring us together," he said. I wouldn't change anything else. The future stretched out before them, full of challenges and opportunities that neither species could face alone. But together, as partners and equals, they were ready to write the next chapter in the greatest love story the galaxy had ever known. The union of two very different peoples who had discovered they were stronger together than they could ever be apart.